Hey guys, this is Matt for cgtuts.com, and in this quick tip tutorial we're going to be carrying on customizing our Modo UI. Now in the previous quick tip we added in this render still and render animation button up here above the shader tree. We did that by first splitting this existing container up into two. We then copied this form layout from over here on the left, added it into our new container, and then edited it to make it do exactly what we want. Now in this quick tip, we're going to be adding another button in here on the left, which will allow us to quickly and easily add different render outputs into our shader tree. Now at the moment to add a render output, you need to do a number of things. You first click Render, then you come up here to Add Layer and click Render Output, and then with that selected in your shader tree, you can right click underneath Effect and choose the render output that you want. So we could say choose Depth. Now what our button is going to do is basically when you click it, it will bring up a drop down of a number of common render outputs that you might want. Then basically you click it and it will automatically be added into your shader tree. So it's just a little bit of an efficiency kick, but it's really just a kind of excuse to go in and customize the UI a little tiny bit more. So the first thing I'm going to do is come up to the top here and click System and bring up the Form Editor, and this is where we edit all of the forms within Modo. So I want to find this form that we previously created, so I'm going to click Find Form in the Form Editor and then click where it says Render Still. Now you can see that Modo automatically goes in and finds this in the forms for us, and you can see that we've got our Render Buttons Quick Access form layout that we previously created. So what we're going to want to do is add in an extra button above this Render Still so that it appears to the left of it in our UI. Now, as you may have realized from the last quick tip, when learning anything, whether it being, Modo UI customization or coding of any type really, I'm a big fan of looking at code that's already been implemented or other people's examples on the internet and kind of breaking them down and taking a look at the individual elements myself and kind of teaching myself how they go together. And I think that's a very, very kind of positive way of learning things and picking up on stuff quite quickly. And that's one of the main reasons that we copied this form layout from before. By copying it and kind of being forced to investigate it and edit it, we learn how to put it together in in the future whenever we want to. So we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to copy a pre-existing button, and the button that we're going to copy is this work plane button up here. And the reason we're going to use this guy is because if we click it, it doesn't actually fire a command straight away. It just brings up this list of subcommands that we can fire. And this is really good because basically it matches what we want over here. If you imagine this says add render output and you click it, in here you'd have, say, depth, ambient occlusion, UV coordinates, whatever you care to put in there basically. So the first thing that we want to do is come up and find this form within Modo. So I'm going to click Find Form and then click Work Plane. And the first thing that you'll notice when it finds it is that this Work Plane button in itself is in fact a form layout containing these many different buttons or options that we see when we click it. So that's the first thing that we've learnt about a drop-down button like this, is that it's actually a form layout within a form layout. And you can actually do that within the Modo UI. So it's a very interesting kind of thing for as you go forwards with your Modo UI customization. So we now want to duplicate this work plane, and this is actually maybe the 10th time that I've recorded this now, and I'm really hoping it doesn't crash when I click duplicate, but with work plane selected, I'm going to click duplicate and hey, okay, we're good. I'm so happy that that worked. So we've now got a new copy of the work plane form layout within our scene, within our Modo UI. And you can see by just duplicating this in place, we've actually added a copy of it up here, and that's clearly not what we want. So the next step is to move this into position over into this form layout. So to do that, I'm first going to roll them both up to make them a little bit simpler to move. I'm going to grab this bottom one with the star next to it and drag this down a little bit and place it and drop it just above where it says Render Still within our Render Buttons Quick Access form layout. And you can see as soon as I do that, it appears over here to the left of Render Still. We now have a work plane drop down over there. Now with that in place, there is one thing that I'm not a big fan of, and that's the fact that all of these are joined together. If you think about it, these two on the right have kind of a different functionality than this guy on the left. So if we can split these up slightly, it'll be a bit kind of easier to see that they're unrelated. And we can do that in the Form Editor by coming down underneath our Render Buttons Quick Access form layout and coming down and clicking on New Control. And within that, I'm going to click Add Divider. Now this adds in basically a little line in our UI that if we drag up underneath work plane, you'll see separates these buttons from each other. So we now have a clear division between the work plane option over here on the left and the render still and render animation options over here on the right. So this just looks a little bit cleaner. Now the first thing we want to do is obviously click work plane, and I'm going to change the label on that to add r.0, so add render output. So when we click this at the moment, we get a list of 5 options in there, and you can actually see a horizontal divider in there as well. So if we go and investigate that quickly, if I drag down the, roll down the add RO layout, you can see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 options, then a divider, and then another option. So for the minute, what I'm going to do is, with this bottom one selected, I'm going to hold down Control, I'm going to click the divider, edit work plane, and offset work plane. I'm going to come up here to the top and just click delete, and then click OK to confirm that. So inside here now we just have 3 different buttons, and that's obviously echoed over here. If we click add RO, we just have 3 options in here now. And for this quick tip, I'm just going to add in 3 different render outputs that you can add or you can choose from this drop down, but obviously you're free to add in whichever ones you want. So the first thing we want to do is rename these little options that we have underneath the add RO button. So I'm going to click the first one, come up here to label, and I'm going to change this to depth. I'm going to change the second one down to ambient occlusion, or amb-oc. I'm going to change the third one down, let's say UV coords. That gives us a nice 3 options in here. And if we come up to our add RO button, you can see that we get 3 same options in there. However, clicking any of these at the moment won't do much for us, because obviously we're using the same commands that existed for the top 3 options in our work plane dropdown. So we now need to figure out the commands in Modo that will allow us to both add a render output and then change its type. And that's where we run into our first problem. Whenever you hit a button within Modo, you're basically firing off a single command. And without getting into coding, the only way we can fire off multiple commands with a button is by using the macro recording system. So that's what we need to do now. So the first thing we need to do is figure out what exactly we need to do in order to add a render output. Now the first thing is you need to select the render option in the shader tree. You then need to click add layer and click render output. And then you need to change that render output into whatever type that we want it to be, so say depth. So we're now going to go ahead and record 3 different macros and save them in the config, and then we're going to add the command which will fire off that macro to each one of these options underneath our add RO layout. So the first thing I want to do is make sure that render is not selected, so I'm going to click on environment. I'm then going to come up to system and click record macro. Now we need to go through those same steps in order to record this macro into our config. So I'm first going to click render, then I'm going to click add layer, click render output, and then change its type to depth. Now with that done, I can come up to system and click recording macro to stop the recording. Now just to check this works, you can come up to system and click replay, which will replay the most recent macro that was recorded. So I'm just going to click that once and we should get a new depth output over here, and we do. So we know that that macro works fine. So I'm now going to store that in the config. So I'm going to come up to system and click store in config, and this just makes it basically accessible by Modo at any point. And you can see that I've already filled this in. I'm going to call it add depth RO, and I've said adds a depth render output, and then you click OK, and it's now stored within the config. So we now need to do the same for the amb-oc and UV coords render output. So I'm first of all going to click environment, then I'm going to come up to the top here. I'm going to come up and click system and record macro. I'm going to click render, add layer, render output, and change that to ambient occlusion, which is down here. And with that done, I'm going to click system and recording macro to stop it. And I'm going to check it once by clicking system and replay, and we should get another ambient occlusion output up here, which we do. So I'm now going to save that in our config. So come and click store in config. We're going to call it add amb-oc RO, and I'm going to say adds an amb-oc render output, and click OK. So we now know that that's stored in our config. Now we need to do the same thing for the UV coords option. So I'm going to click environment, system, record macro, come up to the top and click on render, add layer, render output, and then we're going to change this type to UV coordinates. So again, I'm going to click system and stop the recording. I'm going to make sure it worked by clicking replay. We should get another UV coordinates up there, which we do. So we can now store it in our config, and I'm going to call this add, if I can get that right, UV coords RO, and this is going to be adds an UV coords render output. So we now have those 3 macros stored within our UI. So with that done, we now need to find out where these commands are so that we can add them into our depth, ambOC, and UV coords buttons in our add RO layout. And to do that, we're going to hit F5 on your keyboard, which will bring up the command history palette. Now this is also available up over here under layout, palettes, and it's somewhere down here, command history. So with that done, we want to change from commands, which we were using in our previous quick tip, to scripts. And in here you can see that already selected is the last macro that we actually recorded. And above it we have the other 2, so we have the 3 that we want in here. Now in order to find which command it is, because as you can see when you click them, the command to fire it doesn't come up underneath here in this command box, what we need to do is right click on them and choose Map Script to Key. Now when you do this, what you get is this little box, and at the bottom you can see that we have the command in here that will actually fire off that macro. And this is the only way that I found to really quickly get at this command. If anybody else knows of a quicker way to do this, please let me know in the comments. But yeah, basically what you want to do is select this and copy it, and then hit cancel. And this is the ambOC RO, so in our form editor, I'm going to click ambient occlusion. And then down here under command, I'm going to paste in that macro command like that. And I'm going to hit enter to make sure that that saves. So I'm going to come back up to our command history palette, click on depth, right click, map script to key, copy the command that fires it and click cancel, then come in and select depth in our add RO layout and paste that into the command. And hit enter at the end of that to make sure that it saves. And then finally we're going to do the add UV coordinates button. So I'm going to right click on that macro, map script to key, copy that command, cancel, and then in our form editor I'm going to click UV coords and paste that into the command over there. Now if you hit enter, and we bring this over to the left slightly, we should have a working drop down up here. So I'm going to click add RO and I'm going to click depth. And you can see it adds a depth output to our scene. So I'm going to quickly try the other 2. I'm going to click ambOC, and you can see that that's working fine. And then finally UV coords, and that's working fine as well. So that is how you add a drop-down menu into a UI that toggles a whole bunch of different macros. So this should open up a lot of functionality to you guys, and I can't wait to see what you come up with. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. I hope I didn't go too quickly. Again, I realize that there's a lot to take in these ones, and I'm trying to do it in kind of easily digestible bites if I can. But if you have any comments or questions, just leave them below, and I'll try and get back to you as soon as I can. You can follow me on Twitter if you want. I'm at BadGranola. That's BADGRENOLA. And yeah, until next time, cheers guys.